Welcome to Conscious TV. I'm Renate McNay and my guest today is Ishtar Thomas Howell. Hello, Ishtar.
Hello, Renata.
Ishtar is a meditation teacher, a Ishaya Monk, a gardener. Are all the cabbages in for the winter?
Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah, quite a few. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a writer and an intuitive astrologer. So Ishtar, I read on your biography that you had a sense of yourself till you were 7 years old. And isn't that something quite unusual? And what does it actually mean? Were you aware that you are aware of what does it mean you had a sense of yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a good question. Well, of course it didn't. Nothing struck me as unusual or out of the ordinary at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of accept the world that you're born into. But sort of looking back, I was conscious of basically being in everything, which was interesting. I didn't think that was strange.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I would, if I'd be sitting in my crib, I would play around with feeling myself. I was in the bars of my crib as well, and I felt like I was in my curtains. When my mother would come in, I would feel myself within her, within my sister, and generally within everything. There was a sense of basically, I was very firmly here in this body, and I understood that my sister was a different person, my mother's a different person, that these objects are different things to my physical body, but there was just this sense of peace and relaxation with it all.
Yeah. So does that mean that you were raised in a very quiet, harmonious environment, and your nervous system was still very, very subtle and clear?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be. I think it was, in the grand scheme of things, a really lovely way to grow up. I mean that, of course, as good as my family was, it certainly had its problems, which I did register, at the time as well. Dust-ups between my parents. I wasn't necessarily, keen of those sorts of arguments, but there really wasn't. It wasn't that heavy, and I'd have to say that my sister, my older sister, who, God bless her soul, I think she took, she acted kind of like Jupiter does for the planet Earth, and absorbed a lot of the internal conditioning of the family. Somehow something spared me from a lot of that.
Yes.
And in some ways, I was left to my own devices, and how I perceived things. That was not at all tampered with or bothered. My parents would just use the word creative with me, which apparently was a positive thing, and that was the end of it.
Nice. So then something tragic happened, and you were in the car with your mother, and there was a car crash, and your mother died, and despite the tragicness of the situation, you had a near-death experience, and you fell into a profound samadhi. Can you tell us what happened in this moment?
Oh, sure. Well, in the moment, I was turning my head to the left to talk to my mother, who was, obviously in the driver's seat. And when I turned my head, I must have been just outside of our car. I mean, just about to hit us. A large, sort of Lincoln Continental, Lincoln Town Car, big gray car, and my first thought was shit, and then instead of seizing up, complete relaxation came over me, and I had time enough for a second thought, which was I really thought this life was going to go more than 13 years, so I was pretty certain that the jig was up, that this was the end of the show, and I was absolutely accepting of it. And so, that right after thinking that thought, I found myself, basically having the whole life flash before the eyes And that was something I was always curious about before that, whether that was really possible or not. And there it was, like a reel of film, every single moment in perfect detail. And as I was doing that, there was almost as if there was this profound relaxation that was descending from head to toe. And while I was going with the film, there was also a sense of, I suppose, the higher self, total consciousness. It was an aspect, of my own consciousness that I had experienced, throughout my life, and certainly had a sense of before age 7, and in the years since then, I had kind of, fought against that. It would often come in and sort of seem to spoil some of my best laid plans and only here in this life review process, it was almost a complete sense of openness to it, and so every place in my life where I was still holding a grudge, where the grudge was conceived, or every place where I held up a mask of pretense, every place where I basically had sort of tightened the ego structure instead of relaxed, was seen and released and forgiven, and so by the end of the life review, there was just this complete lightness and complete lack of all fear, and concurrently there was a sense of, again, being completely non-local in my consciousness. I was absolutely everywhere and in everything, and there was a sense of, I am this stillness. I have been the whole time, and I am also essentially love. And so everything that I was seeing in my visual field, as small as it must have been my mother's shoulder and the car about to hit us and the sky in the distance, and all of that was seen and felt as just this awesome love.
Beautiful.
And then,
yeah.
Yeah.
So then, after some time, the Samadhi went, and I guess then an incredible grieving process started.
Yeah, well, for a while they were hand in hand, which was interesting.
Yeah, and you fell into a depression.
Yes.
Yeah. And it must have been really difficult because you only were 13 years old.
Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, we all have our crosses to bear, yes, it was. I mean, for a while that sense of samadhi, and I didn't have any words for it at the time, it allowed a lot of grief to sort of come through very cleanly at the beginning, and so there could be these waves of sadness and denial and anger and everything that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would sort of outline. It was all going rather swimmingly, and there was still this presence, and then once the presence was diminished, and it was hell, and I think in some ways more so because I wanted to get back to that state, and I didn't know how to do it. Yeah.
So, and because you wanted to get back, you had this idea to become a home monk. Is that right?
Yeah, eventually. Yes.
And you started to meditate, and you had a fierce practice, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, having ice cold showers and all that.
Yeah.
So how was that? I mean, was that helpful actually in getting you back?
Mixed reviews there. In some way, it was well helpful for one, because I suppose actually it was something that I absolutely had to do. I mean, for whatever reason, I don't think I'm particularly masochistic, but there was such an impelling urge to jump into ascetic practice that I had sort of kept a cork on it to a certain degree for about 3 years. The first 3 years of my high school years, I was a spiritual seeker, but I was kind of thinking, I have to live a regular life, and I it's going to be more conventional than the possible lives in my imagination, and if I let this thing out of the cork, man, life is going to get real crazy. And eventually I was like, yeah, I have to do this. I have to let this impulse out, and that was to be a crazy kind of at-home monk. And so yeah, I think in some ways I probably added a little bit more tension to the nervous system, but in other ways I think, you know, also maybe just by grace, not necessarily the techniques that I was using. I think by grace there were wonderful openings, and
So,
that sort of kept me hungry and kept me going.
so you, instead of being on the football field, you stayed at home meditating. What did your friends think about that?
um, I can't say I didn't lose friends, but I basically, you know, didn't have much of a social life that last year. So, you know, and maybe it was sort of drawing down and maybe in the year previous or a couple years previous to that anyhow. Um, but yeah, I was functionally doing the crazy monk thing, and so at school as well, I would not do the lunch hours. I would go into the newspaper room and meditate, or go out into the middle of the soccer field and do meditation.
So what was actually your focus in this time? I guess the focus was enlightenment, or what was the focus? Why
Yes.
did you practice? Why did you practice so fierce? Where did you want to go?
Yeah, in some ways I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe that was good of what I would loosely call the end of the road enlightenment. But I was kind of also cognizant that I didn't exactly have. I couldn't have too much confidence in what my projection of what that was supposed to look like would be.
Yes.
I was really going in many ways on the experiences I had in and after the car accident and as a child. You know, those experiences were still resonant in my nervous system. There were still sort of notes that I could, you know, throughout life in my better moments kind of find myself tuning into. And whenever I did, life would proceed magically and smoothly, and you know, no matter what the outward circumstances. So I just had a bug to, you know, get back to that, and if we could call that enlightenment, that would be fine with me.
Yeah, it's interesting when we have these spiritual experiences, how strong the imprint of them is in our soul. I know from myself, I had many. I mean, almost everyone you had. And it's almost like I can go back to them anytime. You know, they are so present still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I can close my eyes, or you probably as well, and they are still alive in us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you read at that time also the book from Yogananda.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
that produced even a bigger yearning in you.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. I think, like so many other people, I mean, it's the same story for so many people. You know, get introduced to that book, and all of a sudden, you know, giant vistas open up where before there was just a wall, and you know, that was that.
Yes, yes. But then you found a meditation practice, Ishaya's Ascension. Can you say what it is? And you became also a monk in an ashram, and then you had even a more dedicated and fierce practice, where I mean, you just need to tell us about it. It's amazing. You were meditating 12 to 16 hours a day.
Oh God, yeah, that was great. You know, obviously. That was I suppose the teacher training program. Right. So and I wasn't you know, going to that ashram to become a meditation teacher. I was basically, you know, scheming really to try to find a place where I could just, you know, meditate as much as I possibly could, wouldn't be disturbed, would be supported in those inclinations, and then would be able to do some sort of work to, you know, to pay for my physical existence.
Yes.
And so you know, that 6 months came about 18 months after I had sort of come to this ashram on the Oregon coast, and they very graciously, because I really didn't have any money, I was a kid, they very graciously, basically created a work exchange program so that I could attend this, 6 months where all I would be doing would be those meditation practices.
So what is the practice? What is Ashaya's ascension?
Yeah, well, it was for me, it came completely out of left field. I had never heard of it before. And funnily enough, I even remember before I went and learned the practice, I was introduced to a fellow who worked at the local grocery store, who was a few years older than me, in college. And, we were told that we should talk with each other because we'd had, similar interests. And he was going on about these people called Ishayas and this thing called ascension. I was actually pretending at that time to know what he was talking about. And, like one does when they're 16. And no idea. So luckily he was still there a year and a half later. And my sister and I were starting sort of a local metaphysical society in our home area. And we were, going around and picking people to invite to come to the meetings and, putting flyers up. And he was the first person we thought of. And we were sitting in meditation in the back room of the library that we had rented. And, I didn't know what he was doing. He's doing silent meditation, but I could definitely feel that presence radiating off of him. I could feel this person is going to the same places that I've touched, and I could feel that there was something real to his practice. And so it must have been 3 months later or so that he just invited me to come and learn this practice. I had no idea what it was. It turned out that it was this mantra-based practice, essentially, except instead of using Sanskrit mantras, it was using short, mainly English language phrases with some Sanskrit down the road. And I didn't think it was going to work at all. I had just been reading Autobiography of a Yogi, where Yogananda is extolling the virtues of the most perfect language ever conceived, Sanskrit, as basically as he put it. So I was a bit of a spiritual Sanskrit chauvinist, I think, in a certain sense. So I sat there and I was like, well, somehow my brother-in-law has graciously paid for me to be here because he knew I didn't have much disposable income at the time. And well, I guess it's just a weekend, so we'll see how it goes. And I was sitting there, and within 30 seconds, maybe a minute of doing the practice for the first time, thinking these sort of short, simple phrases, I was totally in presence, in silence, in a deeper way than I had been in all of my ascetic efforting, and that basically stayed that way for the entirety of that initial weekend. And so I was still skeptical. I was thinking, well, maybe I'm this is just an anomaly, and it's kind of maybe some kind of workshop high, because I didn't attend many workshops or anything like that. And so I gave it some more time to see when the honeymoon phase would end, and I'd crash back down to reality. And it even though it lessened to a certain extent, there was still this steady sense of every time I meditated, I was touching into that place that I was trying to get back to. So I, basically stuck with it, and
Right.
sort of saw it as the answers to my prayers. I was praying feverishly to Babaji when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, because Yogananda has this line in there that basically says, anybody who earnestly prays to Babaji he will hear your prayers. It's like, well, I'm not sure if this is true, but what do I got to lose? I'm gonna really put it out there, because this is earnest. And so I remember the day that I was asked to go to the course. I had woken up on that day in tune. I was so in tune, and I had those days a lot in my life where you just sort of wake up out of bed and you're immersed in this silence, and it's as if you've taken some liquid luck from the Harry Potter series. And I remember the pregnant feeling of that, coming home, and here my brother-in-law asked me to come to this course, and I basically found myself saying yes immediately, without consulting. Well, I can't miss my meditations, I have to be very rigid, and we can't be distracted, we have to be committed. and there it was. It was just the sort of like the eternal yes coming through my heart. So
Beautiful, and this is something you're teaching now to people.
yes,
You're a teacher. Yeah.
yeah.
So you travel around in the world. I mean, if possible, if we are not in lockdown. You live in Portugal. I heard yesterday you have I think a curve, a 2 o'clock in the afternoon curve. Is that right? Curfew.
Yes. No, I understood that. Yes.
Yeah.
We have. Well, let's see. Right now they're doing curfews so that they keep people from partying on the weekends. I think that's the idea. So usually from Friday to Monday or even the following Tuesday, they're saying keep in your home counties. And
yes.
We live out in the middle of nowhere regularly, so these changes tend not to affect us that much because we see more sheep than people.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, I can see our sheep on it's not our sheep, it's our field, but we have a farmer who put the sheep on there, which is nice. They make a lot of noise when they see us and want to be fed on top of eating grass.
Oh, you produced some junk. Did you produce the junkies then? Have you given them some cabbage or carrots over the years?
No, Well, they get cereal in winter. So the farmer gives us a big bag, and so I give them once a day, I give them some cereal. And they are now like dogs. Everybody who comes into the property, they start.
Yes.
And they are very noisy, yeah. So you talk about after the 6 months of teacher's training, miracles started to manifest. And you had celestial perception, and or was it, maybe it was not the right time frame. I wrote it down, and you started to experience awareness while sleeping. And you started to experience different dimensions, and you saw celestial beings and telepathy and out of body and floating cities and all this, it's like you became part of the Yogananda book.
Basically, yeah.
So what happened?
I guess when I was, before I was born or in my crib, some angel came and sprinkled a lot of the woo-woo dust on me, to kind of make those sorts of perceptions abundant. A lot of those were sort of there when I was a kid, especially when I was really young, maybe manifesting more in the vision and the sight, and then sort of sprinkled throughout my childhood whenever I would find myself in one of those days where I wake up in the zone. Those sorts of synchronicitous experiences or experiences of precognition, became were fairly common, and so I think especially after I learned the ascension practice, which I think was really clearing my nervous system out and really tuning me in much more quickly. Like with manifestation. So that's why I don't poo-poo that. As a phenomenon, simply because many times I would basically have this thought or this desire come to me or bubble up, and either saying it or not saying it, things would tend to happen. The biggest incident for me, because I was raised also a rational sort of person, and so I would take these things very lightly and say like, well, you just having just chance. When I was working in our little monk-run cafe, I remember one day just this thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if 20 people, just came into the cafe today, and we'd never had a party larger than 8, and that was one time. We didn't even have seating for 20 people. We had to jerry-rig a bunch of tables together in the back. And, right after I said that out loud, one of my colleagues came up who was working the phones that day, and she said, you two better get ready in that kitchen. You've got 20 people about to come in. And I thought she was joking. I was like, you just heard me, come on. Nice try pulling our leg. And then she was like, no, it's happening. It's like, I still thought she was joking, just going with it. Like, but then when I saw this stream of heads, out the window, entering the door, then it, the game was on. And so I absolutely sunk into maybe the deepest eyes open silence that I'd ever been in to that point in life. And I have no idea how the two of us in the kitchen actually, even physically, produced that food. We produced it in less than 7 minutes from order to finish. 20 main plates and I think about 4 entrees. We were so quick that we had to bring it out ourselves because the other two were making all the drink orders. And so it was actually kind of the people out there were shocked with us sort of coming in. And right after we cleared those, I guess I was on this gambler streak. It really wasn't me at all. That's the thing. I didn't feel like there was an I who was making things happen. It felt more like I and the totality were just perfectly dovetailed with each other. And so then I said, wouldn't it be great if 18 people came in? And sure enough, a party of 18 came right after the party of 20 left. And they basically cleared our refrigerator out of all possible ingredients, so we couldn't have served another person after that. And then we were closed. And I started to say, wouldn't it be? And they said, shut up, Ishtar, we're closed. Because that second party was a little bit dicey. We had to have, we had to have Althea come in and basically jerry-rig some chopping boards to prep red peppers and other things to serve that last party. And so I guess I gave myself also, I had a long-term desire of, I have to give myself something so big and so outside of chance that I won't be able to rationalize it at all. And that was what it was for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you became a wizard, or you knew you were a wizard as well, a wizard.
Oh, yeah, a wizard, yeah.
Well, that shows you how careful we have to be with what we are wishing for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how we create our own reality with that. Yes. Yeah. I for me, sometimes on Facebook or a couple of times I saw you dressed up in a Merlin, like a Merlin clothes or a wizard clothes. Is that sometimes you change personality and be something else?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually that's a funny thing that goes back to my childhood, and I think it was totally endemic. I remember the first game I would organize as like a 3-year-old with some of the neighborhood kids. I don't know how I roped them into it. I really don't. But the first game I called Silent Movie at age 3, and I would take my Fisher-Price flashlight and pretend that it was a camera that you had to crank and make the scripts for everybody, and then make a recording by banging a stick on the railings, trying to produce different notes. It was, and I guess I always had a costume box in my room, and I was born on Halloween, and that also sort of encouraged that sort of behavior. So that, I guess that was something that always stuck, and people liked me to dress up in things. And I think in my early days at the monastery, they noticed that I had especially then a very good skill for doing impersonations of just about anybody on the spot. So they would have me go, and I think I was being used as a tool, in the best possible way of one of the teachers, because my impersonations would sometimes rankle her students, But that's always been there. And of course, who wouldn't be fascinated with Merlin and
well, exactly. And you look
Grail legends and Arthurian lore.
Yeah. So Ishtar, you mentioned earlier, 5 minutes ago, you mentioned the nervous system and clearing out the nervous system. Can you say more about it? Because you also mentioned the speed of our, the factor to determine the speed of our transformation has to do with how clogged up our nervous system is. Yes. And of course, grace. So how do you clear out the nervous system?
Well, I mean, basically, I think the most efficient way to do it is to immerse in the source, to go all the way down to Samadhi. I think of it almost like going into the basement, the ultimate cosmic basement, I suppose. And when you're down there, all the tensions can, as if, start to be released. Like a lot of people do. I was into the self-improvement path, for instance, before I got interested in these other things, and I would keep a sort of a journal of all my faults and foibles as a person. I would spend a lot of time trying to improve this part or to improve that part, but it almost became any victory almost was like a Pyrrhic victory. I felt like Sisyphus, constantly trying to work on something, and then I kind of got hooked up with this effortless meditation, and it borrows a lot from, say, somebody like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who would say, if you want to, heal the tree, go straight to the sap or go straight to the root. If you can nourish the root of the tree, then everything will start to ultimately bloom and prosper. And so that's the logic. Samadhi, that deep state of consciousness, is that ultimate, sap, are the roots. And so if we just go there long enough, things tend to unfold. And you can't just sit there and kind of be an automaton. We have to also, of course, be a participant and active, I think, in other layers of our being. And so, things like doing yoga was on the menu every day for me. Being willing to express, all the emotions that are trying to get out, because, most of us are pretty corked up. We all have different biographies, but, usually there are a few things that we're stuffing or repressing. For instance, in my life, anger was one. I was always sort of bigger and taller, and my parents, wanted me to be a peacemaker and more of an intellectual and keep a cool head and help other people and not hurt other people. And anger was something that was out of control. Anger was something that was taught to me as something I ought not to do. So I was a pretty effective repressor of it. And so there was about a month when I was 19 at the ashram where I was just, that cork had come off, and every little thing was just, making me completely pissed off. And then after about a month of having that come out, I was basically totally fine with it. And so, then if something, if anger came through it, it would flow through, almost with the ease, maybe not with the pleasure of happiness. And so that's something else.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you said, because if we take in some traditions, like in the Buddhist tradition, there are monks who meditate for years and years and years in caves, and then they come out and come to the West and want to be a teacher, and then they mess up, completely mess up. Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of spiritual teachers mess up, and so how does that work then? They of course spend a lot of time in Samadhi and in the ground and in the absolute, our absolute nature, but somehow there's something missing.
Yes. Yeah, well, cases like, say, Trungpa, et cetera, these sorts of cases for me have always been a bit of an anomaly. I know how in theory you can develop, you could sort of develop a relationship with silence and have a lot of these other shadowy psychological peccadillos running about. But in my life, it's very difficult to keep too much of a shadow around, at least to the point where you're not feeling it. But I think that's how it works. I've met some people of different traditions who have told me, in basically said, well, Ishtar, we don't deal with, for instance, chakras 4 on down. And I said, would you say that to me again? And they said, you heard me right. We don't deal with chakras 4 on down. It's like, oh, okay. And I was being polite, and it wasn't my place to sort of get into their lives or their teachings with me. But I kind of realized that's why you have all the sex scandals, because you're simply not addressing these things at all. You know, I wasn't raised in, you know, as a monk in India. I was raised in the West, where you're pretty much getting chakras 4 on down, a pretty healthy dose, you know, from even pre-adolescence. So you kind of are used to dealing with them. So I guess I could imagine that somebody who's not been dealing with them from age 6 would have a real rough and tumble time when they are made to.
Yes, yes. So are there things which still can pull you down in your life?
Yes, yes, yes. Though it's certainly much different than I don't know when I was. It's even hard to remember back when I was 18 what it felt like to be in that. But you know, but even back to 20 something. Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I think sometimes politics or seeing basically seeing cruelty.
Yeah.
That's something that deeply affects me, and that would be something that can yank and can sort of disturb my peace. I'll put it that way. But then it sort of washes through and
So you can get identified with it. Yeah, you shout at politicians. And we are pretty helpless in the moment with what's going on in the world. Yes.
Yeah, it's sad. I suppose in some ways, since childhood, there was always a sense of the Atlantis myth. To me, it seemed quite historical and made sense as soon as I heard it. I had a connection with that. I felt that somehow I was living in the times that I was, because I felt like there was a repeat scenario on the horizon. Then when I became cognizant of sort of environmental problems at around age 8 or 9, that sort of rung that bell. And I was a very keen student of history from a very early age, and I didn't see my current civilization as much different than the Roman civilization. A lot of people grow up and think that here we live in this technological society. We think we're so civilized, but to me it always seemed like kind of as John Anthony West would put it, a shiny barbarism. There always seemed to be the same sort of psychological weaknesses and motivations that had simply been unprocessed by most people, and to me it seemed that it wouldn't take much to sort of set those, sort of bring those elements out.
Yeah.
And that was part of my interest in spirituality. Even I felt that would be the best thing I could possibly do to even be helpful in the times that I thought I was moving into, was if I could be not afraid of death so much anymore. If I could be as clean as possible, then I could be useful, basically when the shit hit the fan.
Yeah.
So
it seems also we have to study history in school and so forth, but it seems we do not learn from history. We make, as you said, the same mistake over and over. Do you think there is any hope for our civilization?
Yes and no. In a certain sense, I kind of, life often feels like a lucid dream to me. Mm-hmm. There is a sense, of my life in particular has seen a lot of, I suppose, back and forth across maybe the veil that separates life and death, and from that sort of a sense of the eternal, of the ultimate witness. This can feel like a dream that, well, if it's going to end in fire and mass extinction and destruction, it's going to. So there can be that detached witness there as well, and from that point I could see it either way. I mean, we are living in a 6th mass extinction. Mm-hmm. That's quite dicey alone. Mm-hmm. And when the environment breaks down, when agriculture faces large challenges, when cities are facing on the coasts, are facing rising waters, when the ocean's dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's if you take that all in, it can feel quite hopeless. But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you are an intuitive astrologer, and you already had a fascination as a child. And the reason I'm asking that now is because I was reading. Just let me look at my notes where I have that written down. That astrology is hold on. So, what we are going through, the planet in right now, was already predicted in ancient time. That something is going in astrology, which is a algorithmically and mathematical discipline. So they already could calculate it thousands of years ago, and it's written in holy books, especially in India, that something is going to happen in the 21st century. Is this something you would agree is from an astrological point of view, is there something you can see which is building up in our time?
Those particular Indian holy books I didn't know about.
Yeah.
So I can't comment on that. But myself and most of I think the competent astrologers that I know back in 2019, when they were looking at, I'd say the 2020 alignments, these are mainly revolving around a conjunction of Pluto and Saturn, and then later Jupiter in the sign of Capricorn. They were, the symbolism of that was possible destabilization of societal structures, both for good and for ill. Some of the for good was shown presaged over the last few years, and when these aspects were still, functioning in the Me Too movement. In the United States, there has been talk of reparations for slavery, which has not been in the public discourse for quite some time in the U.S. Actually, also particular to the U.S. case is that in 2 years the U.S. goes into a very strong, powerful aspect called the Pluto return, which in some ways the symbolism of that is basically looking at all the skeletons in the closet that haven't been dealt with.
Right.
In the case of the United States, you have 400 years of 300 years of chattel slavery.
Yes.
Essentially, you have Jim Crow, you have segregation, you've got women being second-class citizens, you have the genocide of intentional and not of the Native Americans, the displacement of them from their land, all these things that were, and the wars that were, most of them were just, that accumulate. So there has to be sort of a reckoning with that, and how that reckoning goes, astrologers couldn't predict. Some people are going to be able to, individuals are going to be able to look in that mirror and see, where this might be inside themselves, and see what part of this they need to heal and let go of, or transform. Other people might not want to look in the mirror. There might be sort of a backlash and kind of a pushing away. But
so I read that we are entering the Aquarian Age in December now.
Now I know why people say that. It's hard to say where one enters one age, when one leaves one age into the next. It's almost like a big cusp when you're going from this long 2,000 some year age and with the sign of Pisces on the equinoxes to Aquarius, and so I think that the sort of, and they're saying that basically because Saturn and Jupiter are coming quite close to each other at about 0 degrees Aquarius, and are going to be physically very close to each other, so that they almost form a Christmas star, coming together. And I think that symbolically this is sort of a nice jolt to the Aquarian energies, but I couldn't exactly say that it's the beginning of a clean beginning of a new astrological age.
The reason I mention it, because our teacher said once, once to us, or he just mentioned it, that we are entering the Aquarius Age, which is the darkest age ever. That even,
Wow.
even people who think they are enlightened are completely deluded. That's what he said.
Wow.
That gives you something to think. And sometimes, when you talk to enlightened people or some who think they're enlightened, they are completely deluded.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'd be. I kudos to your teacher for being a atypical downer on the Aquarian age. That's quite funny. I don't know if I would take that exact view. I mean, we've gone actually as a species, we've had many Aquarian ages before. We've had Neanderthals live through an Aquarian age, and they probably didn't have the flying saucers, the flying cars, or the things that people predict for this one. But every Aquarian age will be different. How he speaks is how I think of the Kali Yuga. If we talk about the Hindu notion of world ages, which is a different thing, of course. Depending on who you talk to. If I use Sri Yukteswar's, Yogananda's teacher, I basically use his schema for that. We're sort of coming out of a Kali Yuga, and the Kali Yuga, as your teacher described, the Aquarian age is the same, isn't it? It's an age when even the sages are idiots. Which is different. I mean, you could still be a sage in the Kali Yuga. Maybe it takes a lot more determination, but still, you're compared to how you're going to be in the Sat Yuga, you're basically like a half drunk.
So you
interesting.
You do a lot of work, astrological work with clients, and when you say it's intuitive based, how is that different?
Well, in some ways it would have to be the same. Every astrologer needs to use a certain amount of intuition, I think, to really get through it. Just because astrology is practiced in the West, and not Jyotish, is open-ended. There are patterns, but you basically look at a client's chart, and it's like a piece of music, but you have an understanding that piece of music can be played in different octaves, and that even that piece of music in the same octave, if you have Mozart playing it, it might turn out different than if you have Prince playing it, and they'd be the same, different interpretations. And so the intuitive part comes in, and as you go back and forth with the client or not, of kind of figuring out which octave is really sort of coming through here. In my case, I use the intuitive moniker because as soon as I started looking at charts, I had this interesting phenomena happening where I would look at a particular part of the chart, and all of a sudden I would be sort of bombarded with very vibrant and detail-rich little movie vignettes, or I would see a very particular book that was coming towards my forehead, or a particular painting would show up, images, and this, when I go around a chart, this was very common, and so I figured I would start sharing this sort of thing as it came to me in readings, and then I was getting sort of looks of shock and white faces from how closely these images matched their lives, how similar they were, how important they were to the clients. So, yeah.
Nice. Maybe I come one day to you to get a reading. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
What star sign are you?
Oh well, the sun is in Scorpio, and it's conjunct Saturn and Mercury, and with a rising in Scorpio. I know no one ever guesses. I'm so friendly and sociable.
So where's
all that Sagittarius
your
that's in there? I had one as a child.
Right.
It now I just listen to Sting.
Yeah.
And so I'm good. I'm happy with that. I had that as a child so much. That was one of those things that I think really got worked out of me quite a bit. As the more I went into, the more I meditated, the more I did yoga, the more the tension of the nervous system sort of loosened up. There really just wasn't any need for that anymore.
Right. Yeah. Nice. So, one thing you say is, and I still would like to talk a little bit about it, that the only thing we really have to do is to relax. You say Samadhi is waiting for you to relax.
Yeah.
Now that's the hardest thing in our time, and everything is very, looking down, focused, and running around, and unhappy, and how can you really help people? How do you do it in your daily life?
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful that I've gone through some good, solid, hard times, at least on the scale of say, my family, and being quite poor, and really not having that much to eat, and sort of scraping by, and presence was there still, and though in my case I had all this wonderful time to sort of develop it, beforehand, but at some point we kind of, even if we're having a very challenging time, we kind of come to a point where we realize, okay, I can either be having, be in this genuinely challenging time, and be doing all this extra worry and all this extra pushing against, all this extra efforting, which isn't actually going to affect it, or I can be having a shitty time, and I can be, doing some kind of, because I'm a methodology sort of person, so that's what I teach people. I can be making sure that I do this practice, and even if I'm having, a shitty time and I feel like crap, and I'm having a lot of thoughts, I can still, go and do this practice and have some sort of North Star, which I can focus on, and put energy into while this is happening. And, if people take the time to do that, and make the time to commit to that, they tend to start having good results, and they.
So how shall people go about? Just to sit down and some people just don't have the time or motivation.
Yeah. Well, I found that most people, now some people, certainly not all, but most people have some time. So even I'll say, like, do you go to the bathroom? Do you, if you have the time to sit down and go to the bathroom for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, that's your meditation time. If you don't think you've got any other time, turn your bathroom breaks into meditations, at the very least. And if people start with that, then it grows.
Okay, so to start with that, so what shall they do? What's the best thing they can do? I mean, you give mantras, or shall they count their breath, or what's a good thing to bring people to this point?
I think depending upon the person, of course, because we've got people with different dispositional tendencies that might take to this or that. But generally, if somebody's coming in from square one, even counting breath meditation, and if you're able to breathe into your diaphragm, if you're relaxed enough to do that, and doing counting breath while on the toilet, or if you get away from the bathroom, wherever you happen to be sitting, and I find that it's most effective if you're not trying to be perfect, if you're not trying to force other thoughts out, if you're just very easily coming back to the breath, or coming back to your mantra, whatever the mantra happens to be. If you're using Sanskrit bija mantras, if you're using Om, if you use these in a very effortless sort of manner, almost to sing-songy, I think that's generally the most effective sort of thing. I think there's can be some merit to concentration, but I generally think people ultimately come to a much more profound, relaxed concentration if they're effortless and they allow the mantras to simply be pleasing to the mind. And so as far as mantra practice would go, that's what I'd suggest. The So Hum technique, I'm not pronouncing that technically accurate right there. That's a wonderful mantric practice if you want to.
What is a
also
Soham?
involve.
What is?
Oh yeah, the maybe it's more properly pronounced as Sao Hong, but Soham I think is good enough.
Right.
But this is something that the Kriya Yoga people and actually have as their preparatory practice for people to do before Kriya initiation, and is used in has been used in a lot of yogic traditions for some time. But the Soham is basically sitting comfortably, and as you breathe in, you start by simply thinking the mantra So. As you breathe out, you think the mantra Hum.
Yeah.
Once you get used to that, then people can add another moving piece, where they can sort of feel So going up the back of their spine, up to the top of the head, and feel Hum coming down the front of their body, and then they can, when they get used to that, even switch up the order. But I find that to be a delightful practice.
Nice.
And again, I think it works best when a person is not trying to, keep the grocery list out of their head or keep, other thoughts out, to simply allow the thoughts to be there and then come back to either So or Hum, depending on which one you're currently on.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
So, well, I think we came to an end. Time was just going very fast. So you're working. You have a big property in Portugal, and you're working as a gardener or in the field.
Yeah. Well. So we sort of stumbled happily into this place on the internet, and we rent from our wonderful Italian landlord Bruno.
Yes.
And so it was kind of a magical connection, because he's also deeply into permaculture, and that's something that's been an interest of mine for many, many years. And so we sort of live in this a kind of eco house, and have a big fenced-in kitchen garden around the house, and then a big other field to the side. So
nice. Yes. So you grow your own food.
We're getting practice in. So yeah. This is a different climate for me too than the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., which is what I became very accustomed to.
Yes.
So I'm having to learn about a very hot and then arid Mediterranean climate.
Yeah. So you don't have any plans to go back to America?
Yes. Well, once U.S. citizens were sort of banned from coming to the EU, that I probably would be let in, because I'm sort of in limbo with my own Portuguese citizenship process.
Yeah.
And my wife's a proper citizen, so they probably would let us in, but we were disinclined to, make a trip back, especially as the U.S. is it's quite a mess right now.
Well, let's hope it turns around a little bit in January with the new presidency.
Yes, that is something that a desire I've been dropping into the silence for quite some time. A speedy and good end to this pandemic.
Yeah. So do you have any projects planned? You're writing a book or anything coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a few things I can't really talk too much about the television show. I'm sort of sworn to secrecy there, loose lips and all. But that's been taking up a lot of time. Working on getting a TV pilot together that's meant to be a show on spiritual themes, a dramatic show on spiritual themes, and then sort of behind that in the queue are maybe 2 or 3 books, and I tend to just write also things in a flurry as I'm inspired, not necessarily sure if they're going to end up in anything at all. So I just sort of save them into the hard drive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Well, it was really a pleasure talking to you, and and I have to say goodbye. Well, Thank you for watching Conscious TV, and I hope to see you again soon. And bye-bye, Ishtar. Thank you.
So hello and welcome to a brief Conscious TV advert to promote our 2 new books, which are Conversations on Awakening, Part 1 and Part 2. And of course they follow up our first book, which came out about 5 years ago, Conversations on Non-Duality, and then we had Conversations on the Enneagram. And they're all transcripts of interviews that we've done over the years, many of them kindly done by volunteers, and we still have volunteers that are helping with that. If you would like to help, then let us know. I think these 2 are probably, in a way, the most interesting books, the new one, Conversation on Awakening. They're each 12 interviews, a good variety. There's some Renate interviews, there's some interviews done by me. And what we've learned over the years is awakenings and different levels of awakenings happen in so many different ways. Often the real jump can be completely unexpected. Other times the person has worked for years to raise their consciousness, and then something happens. So I won't read you all the people that are on here. If you're interested, you can obviously check out on our website or on Amazon. Or indeed with the publisher. The publisher is called White Crow Books. They have a couple of pages with lots of details on the books. So we have A.H. Almas in part 1, Jessica Britt, Linda Clare, John Butler, Billy Doyle, Cynthia Beaujolais, I'm just picking out a few names, Philip Jacobs, and in part 2,
Cynthia Beaujolais. Cynthia Beaujolais.
Okay.
Beaujolais is a wine, a very nice wine.
So we only have the finest, both in interviews and wines. You see, I don't drink wine, but Renate does, so she knows the finest wines. And then we have Suzanne Marie, is that pronounced correct? Mm-hmm. Yes, jolly good. Richard Moss, Mukti, Mick Pott, Reggie Ray, Russell Williams, Jürgen Ziva, is that pronounced right? Ziva, okay. Yeah. Martin Wilson and Jar Wobble. That's a great name, isn't it, Jar Wobble? He's a good friend of mine. It's John, who was the bass player in Public Image. Any of you guys who like noisy music out there. Anyway, they all have their own unique stories. They all talk from their hearts, and I think they're all fascinating. And sometimes when you read a transcript, you get something different you don't necessarily get from the interview. Obviously, when you watch the interview, there's also a transmission, but by reading it, it also affects you in a different way. So it would be lovely if you order the books. They're physical, and they're also available as ebooks. And that's all I have to say, really. Do you want to add anything?
No.
No? Okay. So hopefully we'll see you again soon, and hopefully this advert wasn't too intrusive in your life.
Goodbye.